Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do on Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section down below, and I pick from those each week. I think I have 24 questions written down from last week's question and answer video. For like 2 months, they were all done out on the road somewhere, sitting in front of some lake or pond or in the desert or someplace as we traveled around the country for about 2 months there. And as you can see, I'm back in the garden. Sunshine ligustrum back here behind me, Laura pedalum over here behind me as well. The garden's a mess, but all the plants look fine. I lost a couple things that we had taken out of containers and put in the vegetable garden kind of store while we were gone. A couple plants, probably that were cold issue where they just weren't ready for the cold we got. Questions like that coming up as well. But I can get it here this week, get the leaves cleaned up, get it back in good shape pretty quick, and back to looking good and moving forward, because a lot of things going on out here over this winter and this spring. The Learn to Garden video series that I have over on my website has a $60 discount this month, and the discount code is DEC60, capital DEC60. Several people have already signed up to use that code, so I really appreciate that. And it'll be through December 31st that code is available, and you can give it as a gift or somebody, as a gift to somebody as well. And then I put up last week somebody asked, I talked about Griffin just being a whirlwind through the garden. You know, if I have him out here, Holly's out here right now. I don't know if she'll walk behind at some point. But the reason I don't have Griffin out here in the videos, and then this week I put up a video about camellias and I had Griffin in the video. If you haven't seen that yet, you'll see why Griffin is not in the videos. He's out in the garden a lot, but he has to be supervised because he's pretty wild. Okay, let's jump into some questions from last week's video. So somebody said, can Camellia japonicas be air layered and when? So if you're doing, air layering can be done kind of whenever you want to, depending on the type of air layering you're going to do. You know, this Laura pedalum has branches all the way down to the ground, and I could just lay one of these branches down on the ground, cover it up with mulch. It eventually root into the ground there, and then I could cut it away from the parent plant. For those of you who've been watching the channel for any length of time, I have plants out here in containers where I've bent limbs down into containers, and they're the branches will just root into the container, and then I can cut the container away and have the plant already containerized. So that's another version of it that I've taught on the channel, and I'm waiting for something to root right there. And then you can come up on a branch and put a wound on the branch, and then put some peat moss, most likely is what you would use for this, around the stem, and then wrap it in some sort of plastic. And then they make plastic shells for this too. You can actually buy a little shell that you squeeze peat moss and the branch in the middle of the shell, basically. And then you can root that stem while it's still on the plant, and then you cut it away from the plant. So there's a lot of different versions of that type of rooting. It's basically leaving something attached to the plant while you root it. You know, I see them teaching it on campus in one of the classic propagation class at NC State. There's a row of figs there that always has little plastic bags or those little plastic things hanging off of them I think they teach them on figs how to do it. But so anytime you want to do that, probably when the plant's actively growing, it's going to be a little bit more successful to do it. Camellias in general are a little harder to root. Typically somewhere about the 4th, 5th, 6th leaf back on a stem is the place that seems to root most readily. I root Camellia japonicas on semi-hardwood cuttings in May. Well, no, not in May, but June here in Raleigh, probably a little bit earlier if I was further south toward the Gulf. But I've got, I root camellias every year. They're not that hard to root if you just want to wait until next year on semi-hardwood cuttings. And I have video on the channel lots of videos on the channel for propagation, actually, if you want to go and look at that. And if you'll just search propagation or rooted cuttings and camellias, almost certainly my video would come up in YouTube. Okay, so several people had asked about a travel log across the country, and I haven't drawn anything out, but we went from Raleigh here over to Dallas, North Carolina, and if you saw the video with Jenny and Jerry, they put one on their channel and I put one on this channel, and then went down to Athens, Georgia, did a video with Dr. Armitage that went up on the channel, video at Ram and Tom's garden in Athens, Georgia as well. Then went up to Chattanooga, Tennessee, over to Nashville, Tennessee, over to Memphis. From there went over to Oklahoma City, a jump in between, but over to Oklahoma City, and we put up a couple videos with Linda Vodder there. If you haven't seen those, they're up on this channel, and she put one up on her channel, touring her garden with her. And from there, went up through Kansas, went to Denver, saw a friend that I worked at a garden center with when I was a teenager, and literally had not seen in 30 years. Just one of my best friends from, and antagonist, honestly. Like a brother. We were like brothers together. So we would get into, we'd have heated exchanges, like literally, that's how close we were, like brothers. And you don't see a person for 30 years. It's just so weird. So we caught up with him in Denver, cut from Denver up to Salt Lake to Boise, Boise over to Boring, Oregon, where we did all those videos at Isley Nursery. Then came back down through all of California to San Francisco, went to the San Francisco Botanic Garden, didn't shoot anything there, didn't want to. I love that garden so much. And then cut back down to Phoenix, and my son's best friend from birth, they were pushed around in carriages side by side, born a couple weeks apart. He's working in Phoenix, and so I got to go and see Charlie's best friend, and that was great. Had a dinner and a lunch with him, so it was part, doing things. Oh, and I just skipped one of the things I went out there for. We went to Janie's house at Dig, Plant, Water, Repeat, and did a video with her and her garden, and that went up on my channel. And then she did a couple with me on her channel, and then cut across, went to Tucson, went to Joshua Tree National Park in California, and then Phoenix, and then down to Tucson, went to Segura, and then pretty much made a beeline back home through Dallas, had some significant engine trouble in Dallas, and then basically made our way back home via Interstate 20 in Texas. If you've ever driven Texas, I've done it a few times now. You come in on 10 at El Paso, and then 10 and 20 split, and 20, and then it's like 800 and some miles across the state of Texas. It's wild. It's basically in the same time zone the whole time. El Paso's in mountain time, but once you get just east of El Paso, you're in central time until you get to the Alabama-Georgia border. And I don't know how many miles that is. It's probably 1,400 miles you stay in central time. For some reason, it's just a really wide part of the country, but that stays in the same time zone. And that's it. That was the circle all the way around the country, and it took 2 months to do because we stopped again and visited with people that hadn't seen, and then also, and I'll talk more about it in a minute. Let's see. So somebody asked me my thoughts on root washing plants. Basically washing all the soil off of a container plant. You pull the plant out of a container, it's root bound or it's not root bound, whatever. And you can literally wash all that old soil apart and make sure, see, there's holly cutting through now. And make sure those roots are all heading out in the right direction and not continuing to wrap around. I have never done it. I've seen many, many people do it. If I was going to root wash a plant, it would probably be a tree. Something that I was pretty much planting in the garden to be there, long after I was gone. I would consider root washing, making sure all those roots are going out and around. You'll see lots of trees where you'll see roots wrapping around right at the root flare at the bottom where the roots weren't teased enough or broken apart enough. That would have solved that. But for shrubs, I've just never done it, and I think you do lose roots. I mean, you tease at the roots, and I tease the roots quite a bit, and if you've ever seen me plant a root-bound plant, and there's a video on the channel, because of course there's 1,500 videos on the channel about planting root-bound plants, I get pretty aggressive cutting the roots around them and not trying to break them all apart, because you're going to do the same amount. I think you'll do more damage in a really, really root-bound plant tearing at it and trying to get all those roots going outward than you are just to cut it in like 4 places. And then I'll literally saw the bottom of the roots off, about a ½ inch of the bottom of the roots. And that gets all those roots in one shot, all going a different direction and not wrapping around the bottom of the container. So for me, if I was going to root wash something and I was really, really concerned about the plant having any issues with the roots entangling one another, it would be trees. for shrubs and perennials. If they're really root bound, I get pretty nasty cutting roots for sure. But I probably would never take the time to wash all the soil off of them. So that's my thought on it. Let's see, zone map. I continue to get lots of things on the zone map, but I have the best video ever coming on the zone map tomorrow with Tony Avent down at Plant Delights Nursery, and I wanted to get a real authority. He was actually on the committee for the 2012 map when it was the last time it was updated. So it was updated in 2012, and then again a few weeks back it was updated again. But when I did a video on it, I don't want to just talk and yammer to be talking like I did in last week's Q&A. I really want to go find somebody who has some expertise on the map, and so that's what we got for a video tomorrow. So I'm excited about that. I think it's a really good conversation, and Tony's just got a lot of knowledge and actually worked on the map. So there you go. Let's see, okay, so somebody asked about planting a container in the ground to keep a potentially invasive plant or a suckering plant from rooting out into the surrounding space. They were talking about acanthus, but you could think about this with mint or anything that might spread by rhizome under the ground and then take over a space really quickly, although it'll creep across the top too. So be careful with that. But trying to contain something that's, a bamboo would be an example of that. You would be trying to contain in a container. I think the container probably needs to be bigger than that container in order to make sure the water is regulated properly. If you just take a 3-gallon container and put it in the ground, it's really, really hard. A couple things can happen. Water can rush into that container if the container's down low. And then it's got that one little hole down at the bottom, or 3 holes down at the bottom, that water may never get out of there. So you may end up with really wet soil in that container. Or the opposite, it's just way drier all the time than everything else, and so you're having to water it differently. So I would put enough space. If you look at Ram and Tom's videos where she has that gold bamboo, and she's got some black bamboo too, they're in concrete containers basically in the ground. They did it in the ground. I'm not saying you need to do all that, but I think you just need more space for that plant in the ground to make sure that honestly the soil has a chance to dry out and things, it doesn't get funky in there. So plant the 25-gallon container down in the ground and then plant it in the middle of that so that it can't get out of that, but give it some extra space if that's your plan. Let's see. So somebody bought sparkleberry holly or deciduous holly, Ilex verticulata, our native deciduous hollies that are so showy this time of year. Maybe the birds have probably started picking them off now, but the fall is the time of year they really show up because the leaves typically get some sort of bright yellow color and then drop off, and then the berries are just like, super, super showy. They bought this thing. It immediately got drought stressed. They didn't water, missed watering it somehow. Happens to everybody. It lost 90% of its leaves really quickly, not due to them falling off in the fall, which they were going to do anyway, but right when they planted it. Will it be okay? Yes, those deciduous plants like that. When you get, I've talked about many times, you get drought stress, the plant will thin, to kind of correct. It can't support this many leaves when it's super, super dry, so it just thins. Yours thinned to the extreme, but once it finished thinning, it had corrected that imbalance, right? So it's totally fine. It may be a little thinner than you want it for a little while, but you can prune it in the future to get it fuller if you need to. Let's see. So somebody asked about planting evergreens this time of year versus deciduous plants. As long as they're acclimated. They thought that I was saying that I only plant like deciduous plants this time of year. They thought that what I was saying about plants being acclimated meant that they had lost their leaves, or whatever, like this Weigela here. You may not be able to see, it's almost lost its leaves. Those are the most hardy things because once they go to sleep, they're asleep and they'll be completely fine. But no, you can plant any kind of evergreen, as long as the thing is hardy in your area and it's been outside in your area before you bought it. So if this Loropetalum was sitting on a shelf somewhere at a garden center and I could get it 50% off now, I'd absolutely buy it. I'm just looking at it going, well, it's not in flower, it's not got a lot of extra growth on it, it's clearly just been sitting outside, same as it would have been at my house. I'm grabbing it and putting it in the ground. When I'm talking about acclimated, I mean, does it look like it just came out of a greenhouse, or maybe it came from 3 states south of me and it just looks like it's not prepared to be in the ground. I got a question coming up about how plants are cold damaged, how cold damage appears on some plants. But anyway, you can look at it and see it's not growing. If it's not growing, put it in the ground. If you're nervous about it, put it in the garage on and off on the cold nights during the winter and plant it in March. No big deal either way, but either conifers or leafy evergreens. Sometimes people say evergreens, and I don't know if they're talking about conifers in general, needled plants, or are they with me on the evergreens can be conifers because they keep their needles, or leafy evergreens, plants that keep their leaves through the winter. They're both evergreens, really. Okay, let's see. So somebody asked about planting Christmas trees after being inside. So lots of people sell live Christmas trees, and you bring them in, and this is, again, one of those acclimation questions, is it acclimated questions? You take something that needed the full sun, and you put it in the house in a heated space with little light, and probably overwatering it. Almost everybody's going to be so paranoid and they're going to overwater those trees inside. It sets up a situation where they don't necessarily transplant back outside all that well. If I was going to do a live Christmas tree, I would buy it. This would be my thing. I would leave it outside. I would let it just do its thing, and then sometime around December 23rd, I would bring it in and do a decorating thing as a group or something like that on Christmas Eve, and then get the thing back out of the house as quick as possible if you have the intent of putting it in the landscape. You bring it in and leave it in for 3-4 weeks, something is going to occur that's going to be a serious setback for conifers, and I've talked about needled plants like that don't recover very fast. And so whatever damage gets done, thinning, branch dies, if it's overwatered, it's probably just be dead. But again, I would leave it in as little as possible if you intend to plant it into the landscape. So somebody says, counter to what I talk about things being over-fertilized, the bulb companies all say to fertilize bulbs 3 to 4 times a year in order to give them the best chance to naturalize. I think the thing that gives something the best chance to naturalize did you put that bulb in a place where it's going to get adequate sunlight when it comes out of the ground, right? Because it needs that sunlight on those leaves. Forget about the flowers on your flower bulbs for a minute, but those leaves are important as well. And the most important thing to them naturalizing, really, because those leaves have to come up, and are they in enough sunlight at that time of year to gain the sun's energy to restore that bulb? Is this a bed that you've worked on over the years, that you've added compost? It's a bed that stays mulched, those kinds of things. Is it a bed that the moisture is adequate? Not wet. You definitely don't want your most bulbs in wet spaces, although there are some bulbs that can take wet spaces. But for the most part, they want even moisture, just like all these other shrubs and trees and things that we normally use in our ornamental landscapes. As long as all of those things are going on, those are all the things that will give your bulbs the best chance of naturalizing and coming back. Just being in not stressed spaces, right? Fertilizing them 3 to 4 times a year is going to ultimately be excess, because I don't know what type of fertilizers we're even using. Are we using fertilizers that have lots of phosphorus in them? Are we using ones that have lots of potassium? If you start using fertilizers that are high in something and you're just repeatedly doing it, it's going to build up in your soil, and it's going to take something else out of balance over time. And so I fertilize once a year while the bulbs are up in the spring, February, March. That's typically when I'm fertilizing. So this ground has everything they need. They're planted in the right spaces. The soil's been improved. They definitely do not need to be fertilized 3 to 4 times a year. And you will put something out of balance in your garden if you continually add calcium, iron, phosphorus, whatever it is, over and over and over and over again. Something's going out of balance in the future. And we had that. I was doing organic lawn care for a company when I was 22, 23 years old. And we got lots of soil tests done right around here, right around this area of Raleigh, inside the Beltline. And they were magnesium off the charts. I mean, really an crazy amount of magnesium in several places. And we tracked it back to lime that had been added where people, and I got a question coming up about over liming. It was a magnesium-based lime that had been added over and over and over and over again because people just went, oh, if it's good to lime, it must be good to lime all the time, and basically had, you know, put everything out of balance. So just be careful. Things you add, you can't take out. You know, you're not getting them out. So make sure that your soil actually needs those things. You're best taking care of the soil and letting the soil take care of the plants. There you go. Enough words. Let's see. So I had a couple people, I talked about getting back to some basic videos, and I got lots of plans here to do a little more basic video content for, you know, whatever. Like those root-bound plant question we got earlier, that kind of thing. And then people made some suggestions for some videos they'd like to see. If there's anything else that you guys like to see that's just, you know, kind of, you know, one topic kind of video, you know, make those notes. You can make those comments as well down below and let us know some videos that you'd like to see on the channel as well, because sometimes I forget, you know, because this channel's 6 years old, and sometimes I jump into the video and act like, you know, the person watching has watched every video I've ever done. So I think it'll be helpful to go back and, you know, show some, just some more base things, which again, on this channel is very, keep the ground covered. And that's, you know, spoiler alert, there it is. That's most of the secrets that you need, right there. So somebody asked about improving gypsum with clay or expanded shell, and mixing it in or putting it on the top. So again, this gypsum question I get all the time. I like to readdress it occasionally because there are videos on YouTube, and this was me. I'm 17 years old working at a garden center in North Raleigh, and somebody tells me, some person that's trying to teach people how to sell things there tells me that gypsum is good for breaking up clay. And I go on about a 5-year run of never questioning. Somebody comes in and said they got tough clay. Man, we got a bag of gypsum right here. Here's it is. How many bags you want? And just sold it to them. I didn't question it because somebody told me. And this is the cut and paste world we live in. This is where we are with gypsum. Gypsum does make water go through clay faster. It does break it up in a way. But it also causes other things to leach out of the soil. So the one great thing about your clay is most of it's pretty nutrient dense. It's got everything the plants need. It's a little difficult to dig in for us, and can be tough for some plants to have issues with for various reasons, from water and, you know, that, and being able to break into that heavy clay with their roots. But it's overall pretty good soil. And so when you start adding something to it that's going to make it drain really quickly, you're going to potentially have other things wash out of the soil as well. So you can lose your phosphorus, you could lose something else. And so these are decisions that are made. There are farmers that use gypsum, but typically they'll use it for sodic farms. So if a farm has become salty, the soils become sodic over time from using too many fertilizers over a long period of time, they'll use gypsum to create a situation where they can leach that salt, okay? So they literally use gypsum so they can leach things out of their soil. And then they're gonna have to rebalance that soil later, of course, right? So it's a tough decision. It's a decision that can be made, but it's a tough decision. It's not a gypsum solves clay kind of thing. And so I would avoid it as a homeowner and work on improving your clay in other ways with compost and wood chips and, you know, other things. And overall, although again, it's really hard if you come from the Midwest and then you come to Raleigh and you start digging in this stuff, it's hard. And so I understand the physical challenges of it, but it is a better soil than you think it is. Okay, and then if somebody asked about they also asked about expanded shale. That's a good thing you could mix in. For sure. I typically, if I'm going to mix something into the clay, use pine bark soil conditioner if it's available to me. I've shown that in videos in the past, but expanded shell will work as well. Okay, but be careful just adding something because you read it somewhere that changes the actual chemistry of your soil. There's no takebacks. There's going to be a few. I mean, this is the second of 3 questions on here. I'm just going to say there are no takebacks. Okay, so somebody said they love to learn the garden video series. Thank you very much, and there's going to be content coming this week. And make sure when you sign up for it that you opt in for the emails The only email you will ever get from me is the day I put up a video to let you know there's a new video for you to watch. Okay, that's the only email you'll ever get. I'm not gonna spam you ever. Let's see. Let's see. So somebody asked about, okay, so they've covered their annuals with a shade protection blanket a few times, and then their annuals are still blooming at this point. That's a great strategy. I talked about it with my fall vegetables many years now. I have a few shade cloths here, and frost protection cloths here. And, you know, sometimes in the fall, this time of year, we've had like 3 or 4 nights in the mid-20s at this point. If the things had been protected on those 3 or 4 nights, they'd still all be blooming out here. All these annuals would be. They'd look a little rough, but I would have a lot more flowers than I could. So, you know, if you're interested in extending your season, do be acquiring blankets and shade protection things, and, you know, any place you can, you know, grab them cheap. Have a stack of them somewhere, because, you know, sometimes you'll get this early freeze, and if you can just get stuff covered for that, you know, you got another month and a half of enjoying the flowers and the hard work that you did during the spring and summer. And then we talked about how, we talk about some protecting of plants in that video with Tony tomorrow on the zone map. Let's see. Okay, so, and I got a lot of questions about leaving the leaves in the garden, and there'll be a video this week on how I manage the leaves in the garden, tools that I can use, that kind of thing, this week. So answers to your questions about leaves will be this week. Let's see, somebody asked about low-growing flowering shrub for their hell strip. So the hell strip, because I call it, is the, and other people call it, is between the sidewalk and the curb. You know, there are a lot of people have this little 2 foot to 3 foot to 4 foot wide space. It's really hard to landscape. It typically is super compact. Usually you have lots of dog traffic, dog pee, you know, those kinds of things. So the plants that you put out there, this person was looking at putting out Bobo hydrangeas, which are hydrangea paniculatas, and will probably take the sun of that area, okay. But they may, you know, I don't know what they'll do with the dog urine and that kind of thing. I think the things you put out there, I think the people that have the most success and most interesting gardens along that space in my neighborhood have upright grasses like panicum. Not wide grasses. Wide grasses, you know, tickle everybody as they go by them all summer long. But the tall grasses are very urine resistant. Things like abelia are urine resistant and will be a low mounding shrub. Indian hawthorns, if you're in a warm enough area, are salt resistant. Boxwoods are salt resistant typically. So, you know, look that up for salt resistant plants, because dogs are going to be an issue out there. Compaction is going to be an issue, and sun. It's going to be heavy sun. So you want sun-loving, salt-tolerant plants and tough plants out there. And a lot of our North American native grasses are probably going to be do very well in those kinds of spaces. Let's see. Low growth. Okay, that was it. So somebody asked about breeding carex, and so we've got. I've shown Everillo carex and that whole series that Southern Living Plant Collection has of striped ones. This person has Evergold. There's lots of different ones in this collection, and wanted to know about the breeding of them. Yeah, you know, these things have been crossed. In some cases, maybe it was just a variegated sport that somebody saw. They saw a little variegated piece within the clump of carex and then divided it out. They've got a solid green section coming up in their Evergold. That's the type of thing I'd pop out of the ground and redivide it and plant that variegated piece back in before that green takes it over. If you have a green, you know, if you have a green sport on a gold plant or a variegated plant, that green sport's going to make chlorophyll much faster, right? And it's going to outgrow the rest of the plant. So always cut those green sports out of your plants pretty quickly. If you have variegated things, you'll know what I mean when you see it. You're going to see a branch that's just normal green in it. Get that out as quick as possible, because that is, and then they were just in general asking about natural or selective breeding. So some of the plants that you see out in the world are just, I saw a yellow piece of privet on a privet and I took the cutting, right? That wasn't a cross. And then somebody on this Loropetalum, I don't know who it was, this Carolina Midnight Loropetalum, crossed multiple Loropetalum to create one that's purple all the way through to the bottom and blooms very heavily with almost red flowers. And so there was a lot of, this was selections made. And this one was just, a natural occurring thing. And so then these, 2 plants get introduced into the market in a different way. But Carex wise, there's like 3,000 species of Carex. We're at the beginning of Carex being great garden plants. I don't know, it's so weird that people chase plants all over the world and then all of a sudden discovered that we had all these great evergreen grasses. They're not grasses technically, but they're grass-like plants growing in these wooded spaces all over the world. And now we're seeing them coming, far and wide. We have like 500 native species in North America. So a lot of opportunity. Some grow in the water and won't ever end up in our ornamental gardens, like the Everglades. The Everglades, that's a Carex. But lots of them are, in dry shaded spaces all over our woodlands, and should be really great plants to put into gardens, to shade gardens, to be resilient plants for dry shade. And they're coming more and more, it seems, every year. New interesting ones. So somebody has an endless summer type hydrangea. So they have a remontant hydrangea they bought at some point that's never bloomed, and it's covered in leaf spot issues, and really by end of summer every year, just nothing but spots on the leaves. So should they treat it or get rid of it? I would absolutely get rid of that plant. That would be a plant that would be on its way out of my garden, and I probably wouldn't put another hydrangea macrophylla back in that spot. I'd probably put something else in that spot. But if it's a plant if you've had it 3 or 4 years and it's never done what it was supposed to do, you can try it. You can dig it up and put it in another space. Maybe you've got it in too much of a dark space. Maybe there's just not enough air movement there. So you could try it in another space, but it sounds like to me that's one that I'm going to get rid of and try something else in that space. Somebody asked about a question about drought-tolerant trees and shrubs. That would be a long list to put in a Q&A video, but I do have several on the road. I had taken a lot of photos before I left of drought-tolerant shade plants and several videos that I meant to get up on that trip and didn't get the chance to edit them. So those first, it's raining right now actually, but the first day it kind of shuts me down inside this winter, I'm going to get those videos up on some just kind of tough ornamental plants for different conditions. So somebody asked about biological reasons plants die in a freeze. What adaptation other plants have to survive. So some plants this is an evolutionary thing. Some plants came from Ecuador or, some sort of tropical space, and, or in Japan or someplace where it wasn't below freezing. And so they just never developed any defense to it whatsoever. And so as soon as the cell walls freeze, the water gets trapped in the cells, and water expands when it freezes, and they just explode. And so that's what you see if you leave one of your house plants outside, or a plant's got a lot of new growth on the, tender new growth, which you would have go out in your garden right now and look around, you'll see, that mushy kind of thing is just where the cell walls exploded, and it just became mush. We talk about in the video tomorrow with Tony that sometimes if it stays just barely below freezing for a second, that damage will start. But if it gets back above freezing pretty quickly, it can be reversed, pretty quick, and not even hardly lose a leaf, just a little scarring on a leaf or something. So you have plants that are adapted to it, but then the freeze happens too quickly, and that's what we saw last year with that December 23rd freeze. The plants had water still up in them; it hadn't gotten cold, and so normally we'd like to see nights in the 40s, and then nights in the 30s, and then nights in the low 30s, and then maybe a couple frost. So this plant is in the process throughout that whole thing of getting water out of the leaves and getting prepared for a hard freeze. When they don't get prepared for those hard freezes, then that water's still in the leaf, and that same kind of thing happens. Then you have plants that can develop salts and sugars in the place where the water was, and it almost acts like an antifreeze. And then there are plants that produce chemicals that are like antifreeze-like in their stems. And so this is an evolutionary thing. This is a plant-to-plant thing. These plants evolved in different spaces with different techniques to protect themselves from cold. We move them all over the world. And so this garden has a lot of native plants in this garden from, if we call in, again, North American natives. And then there's a lot of plants from Southeast Asia, non-invasive plants from Southeast Asia, I should always say. But those plants, maybe they wake up a little earlier than they would have in their home space, and they lends them, you know, possibly to being damaged a little more. Maybe they don't go to sleep properly. Maybe they only go to sleep here by getting slammed with a freeze. So we've taken them out of place too, right? And the timing may be different on how the weather works here than it did in the place where they evolved. So a lot of different things going on, but there are plants that are just flat out capable of producing antifreeze-like chemicals that keep them from freezing and keep those cells from bursting. I'm letting Holly inside. Somebody asked the best way to eradicate roots in a bed that they pulled out all of their shrubs and things, and how long is it going to take for those old roots to disappear? A long time. Those roots are under the ground. That wood is a different type of wood than the wood that's above the ground. There's not as much light, not as much opportunity for things to break those things down. The small roots will disappear pretty quickly, but the big heavy wooden roots can last years, probably, and grow some mushrooms in the meantime. And they were talking about the best way to plant in those areas, and I've always said find small containers if you can. You know, it's much easier to plant small containers in areas with where there's roots or rocks in the ground that you're dealing with. If you can find smaller containers, that's just the way to go. Be careful with those drill bits in areas with lots and lots of roots. It can really kick back, you know, when you grab a root with one of those drill bits. So just be careful if you're using any kind of drill bit for that. Let's see. So then somebody said their gardener has been putting out lime 2 times per year for a long time. So this is again that thing where we found this little pocket in Raleigh where all these people have been putting out lime, you know, and they just thought, well, it's, they wanted their acid soils to be more alkaline, and their grass would do better at 6.5, and their pH may have been 4.5. So once they got on the lime train, they just kept on going, and then basically created toxicity with one particular nutrient. So, you know, it's not a good idea. We do things with soil tests. So I'm not saying it's bad to lime, or it's bad to use gypsum, or it's bad to fertilize 3 or 4 times a year. I'm saying that all of that should be evidence-based though. You know, you should have a soil test that says, I need these things, and then let's apply those, you know, at the appropriate time of year. So again, that's always the answer is don't add anything except for, again, I'll add a small amount of organic fertilizer out here in February or March just to show you how little fertilizer I'm going to fertilize with. Okay, so somebody said, here's the thing. When we travel, so on that trip that I just explained, we went to 3 or 4 botanic gardens. Dallas is on that list. And went to multiple people's, 3 other YouTubers' houses. Went to Dr. Armitage's house. Next year, we're actually going to visit some of your houses. And so the before and after photos that you guys have been sending in, I've been putting aside in folders, and I'm going to contact people by region, and we're going to go and visit some of your gardens next summer, which I'm super, super excited about. When we go out on one of those trips, how much documentation of the trip would you actually like to see? That's a question I have. And this is not a travel channel, so I've never treated it as a travel channel. But would a video from that trip that shows photos from the San Francisco Botanic Garden and Dallas Botanic Garden and, the Arboretum and Botanic Garden, and some of the other places that we went that didn't show up in a particular video be of interest to you guys? That's a question. If you'd answer that down below for me, I'd appreciate it. So somebody asked about winter gardening tips for newly planted trees and shrubs. At this point now, it's going to be water. And if it's marginal plants, be prepared to cover them. So if you're in zone 7 and you planted something that's only hardy from zone 7 to 9, that zone 7 plant going in the fall, potentially you could have a winter where you get, because the zone map is average low temperature. It's not the absolute low temperature. Every 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to get a freeze cold enough to kill a leafy evergreen shrub in your zone 7 garden, okay? Be prepared to cover it the first winter if it's a leafy evergreen. The deciduous things are going to be absolutely fine. It's super dry. When I say it's raining right now, I've gotten hit by 40 drops of rain, okay, in this entire video. It's supposed to rain the last 2 days, and it hasn't. It's dry. It's drier than when the rain started. And so watering is definitely an issue as well. So somebody asked about their Farfugium. They're in Greensboro, now zone 7B. And that one's an interesting one because Greensboro's always several degrees colder than Raleigh virtually every night of the winter. So I'd be careful with something that's only hardy in 7B in the Greensboro area. I just would be going forward. Let's see. Their Farfugium just melted when we got up mid-20s freeze. Mine did over here too. It's just completely normal. They wanted to know if they should cut it back. No, just let that foliage protect it, for the next few weeks. And if you want to clean it up in the spring, right before it starts to come back up, that's probably the best thing to do with it. Farfugium are just amongst my favorite plants. That plant it's so hard for some people because we'll call it ligularia. For a long time it was a ligularia, and I think has some history being called senecio. All of those are aster family things. Asteraceae. You see my shirt says ACA. These shirts are available for purchase down below as well. gotta hawk something, right? Because this is YouTube. Let's see. That's one more question here, and I'm going to turn the camera in order to do this question because sometimes the plant somebody's asking about is right beside you. So somebody asked, is Fat-hedera right here? Is this I went too far. Is this a vine or a shrub? That's a really good question because it's not vining in any way. I mean, it grows vine-like, right? It's just stretching out, but it doesn't have anything, it doesn't have any holdfast on it to attach to the house like it's one of its parents is ivy. Fat-hedera, hedera being ivy. One of its parents has holdfast that can climb trees and climb across the ground and pretty much on anything it wants, but this one doesn't have the holdfast, so it can't hold on to it, right? But then it's not like a woody, multi-trunked thing that we would typically, call a shrub either. So it's kind of neither one, and it's an intergenus hybrid, which is we rarely see in plants. You'll see plants where you'll see like Ilex X, Nellie Stevens holly. So that X means that it's at least two species crossed together. And you'll see the genus Ilex X, meaning two, where the species would normally be. That's two, at least two species, and then the cultivar name. This is X Fat-hedera, which is interesting. The X actually comes first because it was two genuses that were crossed together. It's only been done once. It's interesting. It's never been duplicated. It was done once, and then people have kept it alive and then picked various ones that are variegated or green or whatever. But super interesting plant. And there we go. All right. So thank you guys so much for following along with the channel, asking such great questions. Ask gardening questions down below, and I'll be back next week with another Q&A. Thanks for watching.